All right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you. I am Caleb. That's right. I am Caleb Ives, and if I haven't met you yet, nice to meet you. I'm teaching pastor here, and Pastor Tyler and I are walking through this series, Unflashy. We're wrestling with this idea of being unflashy. You see the definition here: not bright, ostentatious, or showy. Not flashy. And Tyler introduced you to that definition last week. And we're wrestling with this concept of what it looks like, and we're doing that by going from 2 Corinthians 10 through 13. And we've been walking through 2 Corinthians all year so far, and so that's where we're at in this book. So if you got your Bible, go to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. If you don't have it, it's okay. The verses I'm talking about will be on the screen, but I think if you got it, it's helpful to engage it right there in front of you. So go ahead and go to chapter 11. We are in second week of this series on Flashy. But as I looked at the passages that I was covering today, I kind of felt like there was this big hustle that the team put in order to make me have to teach a passage that starts with this verse right here in verse 1. I hope you will put up with a little more of my foolishness. Please bear with me. I feel like this is all a big scheme that Tyler put together, so I'd be the one that had to say that at the start of my message. And my wife would agree that oftentimes she puts up with a lot more of my foolishness, but we're going to do that today. But we're dealing with with unflashy, right? That's the topic. But last week Tyler introduced us to the working definition we have between what it means to be a flashy person, to be flashy. And so we said this, that he said, flashy is the false belief that I need to be cool, awesome, or great in order for my life to have influence. In order for my life to matter, in order for my life to have significance, I need to be cool, awesome, great, amazing, popular person. Now, I'll be honest with you that makes a lot of sense to my brain. That's kind of how I'm wired to think, but in reality, that's how our culture works, but that's how I work. In fact, this is an example of me. When I was in high school, I really wanted a starter jacket. Now, I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but the cool thing to have, if you were into sports, when I was in high school, was to get a starter jacket. And I wanted a Michigan starter jacket, and it would look so cool. So I asked for it for Christmas, and I opened up my presents at Christmas. And guess what I didn't get? A starter jacket. It had this cool the logo would hang right here, the little starter logo would hang on the zipper, and it was so cool. I did not get a starter jacket. I got a Michigan coat, a perfectly good winter coat that was a Michigan coat. It was nice, but it was not the brand I wanted. And I was big into trying to have the right brand if I could, because I wanted to be flashy. I wanted my life to matter, so I need to be cool. I need to be awesome. And I did not get a starter jacket. But later that winter, in an act of complete idiocy, I thought to myself somehow, and I know I had a couple friends counsel me in this wise decision, if I just break this jacket, then my parents will have to get me a new one, and I'll try to manipulate my way to get a starter jacket. And so I took my coat, and I slammed the zipper in the door of my friend's car. And then I ripped the coat out of the door in order to tear the zipper off. And I came home, and I have no idea what I told my mom happened to that zipper. It definitely wasn't that. I didn't tell her the truth. But I came home with some explanation for, oh, look, this thing just came apart, the zipper. I guess I gotta get a new coat. And for the rest of the winter, I just had these two little buttons. And I had to button my coat, and I wore that for the next winter and the winter after that. I did not get my starter jacket. But I was very motivated by that, and I've still got that in me, this desire to be cool, this desire to have the right stuff and to be impressive. And what we're dealing with in this series is that in 2 Corinthians 10 through 13, Paul has been building up all the way, and now he's emphasizing to the people of Corinth that to be a follower of Jesus is to be a follower of someone who was not flashy. Who was not flashy, who did not have all the right stuff and wasn't a really impressive communicator and all this. And then Paul himself is not flashy. He's not the cool guy in town. Paul didn't have a ton of followers on a social media account, if he had that, which he didn't. Paul was not flashy. And what we're going to see is that in a culture that admired what could be externally presented, the gospel that Paul has preached challenges is something that is an internal reality that may very well lead to not being impressive externally. And here in chapter 11, he's specifically dealing with a problem that's going on in the church there in Corinth. And it's the problem of these people called super apostles. So you'll see this. As we get into chapter 11, you're going to see a contrast between Paul versus super apostles. Paul versus super apostles. And who are these super apostles? Well, Paul had spent a year and a half there in Corinth, and you know this, we've talked about it in previous weeks as well. He spent a year and a half there pouring his heart and soul into these people. He stayed in their homes. He shared meals with them. He met with them on a daily basis to explain the gospel to them, help them understand the ways of Jesus. And after he left, some other people had come in to speak in Corinth. And these were really flashy, traveling speakers. They were better looking than Paul. They dressed better than Paul. They were richer than Paul. They ate better food than Paul. They were better communicators than Paul. And when they came in, all these Christians in Corinth, many of them welcomed these other teachers and started to think, man, these people look better, sound better. They must be better than Paul. So in chapter 11, what we see is Paul is going to be dealing with the fact that so many of these Christians have begun to look for what was most impressive to them and have turned their hearts not away from Paul specifically, but turned their hearts away from the gospel that Paul has preached. Let's look at this beginning in verse 4 of chapter 11. He says this, "You happily put up with whatever anyone tells you, even if they preach a different Jesus than the one we preach, or a different kind of spirit than the one you received, or a different kind of gospel than the one you believed." Now, let me just clarify this for you. There is no different Jesus. There is no different gospel. What Paul is saying is, these people are coming in, and they are impressing you, and they are incredible communicators, and they're really gifted and highly trained. And you are listening to them and receiving that as truth, but what they're preaching is not the truth about Jesus, it's not the truth about the Spirit, it's not the truth of the gospel. And he goes on and he says this, "But I don't consider myself inferior in any way to these super apostles who teach such things." I just love that, super apostles. I just imagine like Superman, you know, like the super apostles show up and they're like, "Yeah, you got your apostles, but we're the super apostles." And they look like Thor. I think Thor is the most impressive of the Avengers. All right, so the way to these super apostles who teach such things, "I may be unskilled as a speaker, but I'm not lacking in knowledge. We have made this clear to you in every possible way." I want you to notice something here. Here's what Paul doesn't say. You're turning to follow them instead. I'm a better speaker than them. I'm more talented than them. I'm more impressive than they are. He says, no. I am unskilled as a speaker. Now, Tyler mentioned this last week, but isn't it funny, though, that we turn all the Bible characters into Hollywood stars? It's incredible to me that we turn Moses into Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments. And Moses was a terrible communicator. It says he was slow of speech. So Moses may have had a stutter and had a difficulty communicating publicly. That's Moses. And Paul, we think of him as he is just some handsome, incredible communicating man that strolled into town and everyone wanted to hear what he had to say. And when in fact Paul says, "No, I'm actually not the greatest speaker you're going to hear. I'm not really that impressive." What he uses as the comparison, though, is the knowledge he has. What does he know to be true? That when he wants to compare himself to the super apostles, he doesn't compare the talent and ability. He compares the content of what they have to say. And he goes on and says this, "Was I wrong when I humbled myself and honored you by preaching God's good news to you without expecting anything in return?" Other translations say, "Was it wrong for me to preach the gospel to you free of charge?" I think, well, why is he saying that? Well, here's why. Because the super apostles, when they came to town, they would come to say, hey, we have this message about Jesus. We want to present it to you for a simple fee of $500. You can come to our church service and hear the gospel. And the Christians in Corinth are readily paying money to go hear a sermon preached. And Paul says, was it wrong then for me to come and share with you the gospel of Jesus and not charge you money to hear it? Now, why is he saying that? Because something about the way the super apostles are carrying themselves is causing these Christians in Corinth to be deceived to follow them instead of the message Paul preached. And it has something to do with the fact they charge money, they look good, they're more impressive, and they are being led astray. Now, Paul piles on, and he doesn't just say, you put up with whatever they teach you, but he also says you put up with however they treat you. And he says this, you put up with it when someone enslaves you. I think we're getting sassy Paul right here, just so you know. Paul's sassy every once in a while. He's got sarcasm, and I dig it. You put up with it when someone enslaves you, takes everything you have, takes advantage of you, takes control of everything, and slaps you in the face. I'm ashamed to say we've been too weak to do that. Now, Paul here is being sarcastic in this use of the term weak. He's saying these people have come in and they're leading you to believe the wrong things about the different Jesus, a different spirit, different gospel. Not only that, but they are charging you money in order to come and hear what they say they have for you as good news. And they are mistreating you. They are oppressing you and forcing you to kind of take a position as their servant, to treat them as greater than you and lift them up. And you eagerly welcome this. And Paul says, I'm sorry we were so weak to not do that and slap you in the face ourselves. Now, as I mentioned this to Tyler, I really wanted to bring someone up and slap him in the face in front of you as an illustration. He thought that was a bad idea. So I'm not going to do it. Also, I said it should be him. So just kidding. All right, so you hear Paul's sarcasm, but here's what he's emphasizing is the contrast between these two types of people. And here's what we find. The contrast between the super apostles and Paul is really a contrast between impressive false teachers and unimpressive speakers of truth. Impressive false teachers and unimpressive speakers of truth. And the problem there in Corinth is the same problem that, honestly, every culture that's like Corinth has. See, Corinth was a place of competition. The Olympics were there, of those days called the Isthmian Games. They were there. They had speech and debate presentations where people would show up to be public speakers in front of essentially a coliseum's worth of people. They had incredible actors and performances. They had wealthy people. And it was a city of fame and talent and ability and competition. And any culture like that easily begins to evaluate the messenger more than the message. That we can tend to begin to look more at the messenger than the message. And here's the deal. Those messengers, the super apostles, they looked like all the Corinthians wanted to look. They dressed like the Corinthians wanted to dress. They had the money and the fame and the power the Corinthians in their own flesh, just like us, wanted. But they weren't speaking truth. We struggle with this today. If you have social media, then you know about these social media influencers. All right? That's what I thought of as an analogy. Now, some of you might not have social media. Congratulations, that's great. But if you have it, you interact with social media influencers. And some of them have great things to say and really use their influence well. But there's other ones as well. There's other types of influencers. And what it proves, social media influencers proves that the human instinct is to give someone influence in our lives, even if they're ignorant, as long as they look good, they're rich, they're powerful, they're famous, or they're really impressive communicators. Even if they don't know what they're talking about, we will follow their lead as long as they look like we wish they're living the life that we wish we had. They look good, they have money, they have fame, they have power. So celebrities will get influence in our life in this way. Now, the problem is that it's never been about whether a messenger was impressive. It's always supposed to be about whether the message is truth. And here's Paul, unimpressive. When he'd come to town, he maybe stumbled over his words sometimes. Sometimes maybe he just kind of took too long in his sermons like Caleb does once in a while. All right, in fact, one time, Tyler mentioned last week, he was preaching so long that someone fell out of a window and died. Okay, I haven't done that. All right, that's why we have the first floor only here at this church. All right. Unimpressive Paul, we know that he probably was hobbled. He'd been by this time really treated badly and suffered a lot of things. He wasn't a great looking guy. He showed up, and now these other false teachers is like, man, they look better, they sound better. Maybe I'll follow them instead. Now, Paul continues on in chapter 11 to contrast himself with these super apostles. And he does so by dealing with this idea of boasting. Boasting. Now, boasting, here's the definition of that. Boasting means bringing glory to someone or something. Bringing glory to someone or something. Now, Paul doesn't just pull this idea of boasting out of thin air. He's referencing something these super apostles would have happen. If you've heard of a hype squad or like a hype man, here's what that would look like. The super apostle comes to town. Let's say it's me. By the way, I hope I'm not a super apostle. All right. But he comes to town, and Caleb's going to speak, super apostle Caleb. But I wouldn't come out yet. I'd have the hype man come out. And the hype man would tell you, Caleb Ives is about to speak to you, and you're so privileged. He went to this university. He graduated top of his class. He's been trained by the most elite educators in all the land. He's spoken in front of thousands and transformed cities and nations around the world, and now he's come to you. So if you'll pay $200, you can come hear his sermon about this man, Jesus. That's what it would look like, a hype up of all the things that they could boast in. And they would boast in order to build. Look how impressive this speaker is. And then they would step out and they'd be ready to speak. And so Paul says, all right, I can play that game. You want to boast? Let's boast. And he says this, picking up in verse 21. He says, but whatever they dare to boast about, I'm talking like a fool again. I dare to boast about it too. Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they descendants of Abraham? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I know I sound like a madman, but I have served him far more. All right, Paul. So then you're about to tell us why you're more impressive. Why you're more impressive than those super apostles. Oh, Paul, tell them about how when you met Jesus, you saw Jesus in front of you on Damascus Road. Paul, tell them about when you were in Philippi and you were imprisoned and God shook the prison and then an angel walked you out. Paul, tell them about Galatia, where you went city to city and a multitude of people gathered around you. And one group even thought you were a Greek god because of the power that was demonstrated through your life. Paul, tell them about Ephesus, where you just spent 2 years of your life. And where from there, all of that region of Asia Minor heard the gospel through you and your disciples. Paul, tell them about how great you are. And here we go. Here's his boast. I have worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped times without number, and faced death again and again. Paul, this isn't really the right start. Don't you think you know how this works? Let's keep on going. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times. By the way, 39 lashes, they believed that 40 lashes would kill you. So 39 lashes was essentially being whipped to the point of death without executing someone. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and day adrift at sea. I've traveled on many long journeys. I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as from the Gentiles. I have faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, and on the seas. And I have faced danger from men who claim to be believers but are not. Not boasting too well, Paul, but that's okay. I worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. I've been hungry and thirsty and have gone without food. I've shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. Then besides all this, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak without my feeling that weakness? Who is led astray and I do not burn with anger? And he's talking there about the Christians he's caring for. When he hears they're weak, he feels that weakness. When he hears they're being led astray, he feels anger towards that, to want to protect them. Now I get to the end of this, and if you're a Corinthian, let me explain what you're thinking when you're reading this, when it's being read out loud to you. Paul, I thought he said he was going to boast. He is terrible at boasting. He is terrible at boasting. What are you doing here, Paul? And look at Paul's boast. Here's what it is. Beaten, endangered, hungry, and burdened. Beaten, endangered, hungry, and burdened. Now, we all like the idea of someone being humble, unless it's us, but we all like the idea of someone being humble. We think of that as an admirable trait. In fact, as we read through Paul's list, we can tend to think of humility in what Paul's saying. Wow, he definitely should be listened to because look how humble he is. But the Greek thought was seeing something called humiliation. Now think about the difference in your own emotion when you think about being humble and when you think about being humiliated, right? 2 very different things. If you think I'm humble, I kind of like that. If you humiliate me, I'm ready to fight you. All right? I don't want to be humiliated. What they are hearing Paul say are humiliating things. Paul, you have went without enough food. These super apostles have all the food they need and they could throw it out in the crowd. Paul, you didn't have enough clothes that you were shivering in the cold. That's humiliating. These super apostles have the best clothing that people can purchase. Paul, you've been beaten to death like a criminal. These super apostles live in wealthy homes around our city and all through the land. This is humiliating. What Paul is doing is not just saying, he's not saying, look at me, I'm humble. Paul is literally humiliating himself in front of them. And he goes on in verse 30 through 33, and he says this at the end of this portion on boasting. He says, if I must boast, I would rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. God the Father of our Lord Jesus, who is worthy of eternal praise, knows I am not lying. When I was in Damascus, the governor under King Aretas kept guards at the city gates to catch me. I had to be lowered in a basket through a window in the city wall to escape from him. Damascus, this is the very beginning of Paul's Christian life. And he says, you know what? Let me tell you how this whole thing started. The king of that city, had guards, and I was afraid of being killed, and so I got stuck in the laundry basket and lowered down with sheets out a window so I could run away. Paul is again humiliating himself. That is not the picture of power. Don't you all want to be in a laundry basket lowered from a window like me? Listen to my great words. Don't you all want to be beaten with rods and whipped 5 times to the point of death, imprisoned, shipwrecked, spend a night adrift at sea, hungry, thirsty, without enough clothing to keep yourself warm? Don't you all want that? Come, learn how to be like me. Paul is showing he is the exact opposite, and we have to ask ourselves, why? Why would he rather boast about the things that show how weak he is? At the beginning here, I listed to you several things he could have mentioned. Paul was trained by the most highly respected Jewish scholar, rabbi, named Gamaliel. He doesn't mention that. Paul grew up in the best education amongst the Jews. He doesn't mention that. He has traveled all over the empire and spoke to multitudes of people. He has seen miracles happen through his hands. He doesn't list any of that. Instead, he says, I'd rather boast about the things that show how weak I am. And the question is why? Here's what we see through Paul's life. And here's why I think he's emphasizing this to the Corinthians and to us. Is they were a culture looking for those who could show them the path to power, fame, popularity, and comfort and ease. And Paul is making it very clear the way of Jesus is not the path to those things. Following Jesus is not a path to power or fame. Following Jesus is not the path that those super apostles had walked to get to where they are. Following Jesus is a path of humility. Humility. If you read through the New Testament, one of the themes that is most prevalent through the entire New Testament is the idea of being humble. And like I said, we love being thought of as humble, but I know for me, I don't like being humbled. I don't like being humiliated. I don't like being made to be seen as weak. But here's why Paul does this. Let's look at the next passage here. Picking up in chapter 12. Now, I'll say to you, in the first 5 verses of chapter 12, Paul alludes to a really incredible spiritual experience he'd had with the Lord, but he talks about it like it's about another person. He says, I'm not going to lean into that. Here's what he says. If I wanted to boast, I'd be no fool in doing so because I would be telling the truth. He's saying, I could sit here and try to impress you. I could give you a whole list of all the great things that I've accomplished, but I'm not going to do that. And here's why. Because I don't want anyone to give me credit beyond what they can see in my life or hear in my message, even though I have received such wonderful revelations from God. Paul says, look, I don't want people to be attracted to how impressive I am. Whatever people are impressed with, I want it to be that they see something in my actual life or they hear something in the content of my message. And that is what draws their heart. That is what impresses them. And we see, when we think about being in a flashy world, we see that for the follower of Christ, our boast, just like Paul's, is in substance, not style. And you hear that comparison all the time, right? Substance and style. Our boast is in substance, not style. We have all witnessed it in some way in our culture, even in church culture. The people who could present so well and style it up real good, But then once the actual life got revealed, it all crumbled. And their entire empire and their entire message or even entire ministry has been just built on an external shell of style, of presentation that was impressive. And I'll tell you, I was inclined towards this. I remember I tried to plant a church years ago. I wanted to. I told God that was what I was going to do, and it was going to be huge, and I was going to become famous, and you would all be watching me on TV. Which, by the way, this last year, people did get to watch me on TV. Didn't see that coming. That's what I was going to do. I was going to do something so big. And that was about 10 years ago. And God stopped me in my tracks by his grace. Because underneath the substance of my life was broken. And if I would have succeeded at chasing all my big dreams, it would have destroyed me. And perhaps even destroyed my family. Because God was more concerned with what's actually underneath here than what we can present, right? He's not concerned with us impressing the world around us with our performance. He's concerned with us being something underneath. And here's the reality in my life that I know I want my life. The closer you get to my life, I want it to be a greater and greater testimony that I believe what I proclaim. And that's what all of our boast should be in. He goes on in verse 7 through 9 as we come towards the close, and here's what he says. He gets more personal here. He's listed the things that have happened to him, things he's endured that show his weakness. But now he says this, so to keep me from becoming proud, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger from Satan to torment me and keep me from becoming proud. Let me save you some time. Don't ask me. I don't know what this is. And no one really knows what that thorn in Paul's flesh was. I used to think I really wanted to know. I'll tell you, some think it's a physical ailment that he struggled with and couldn't get over. And we do know he struggled with his physical health along his missionary journeys at times. Some people think it's the relational conflict in his life from the persecution and people who opposed him that he's talking about here. And other people think it might be like a tendency towards a sin temptation that he just had to wrestle that temptation throughout his life. But all we know for sure is it's something that he begged the Lord to take away. And here's why I love that we don't know what it is. Because we all have something in our life that is an area of weakness that we wish the Lord would take away. And we've done the Gethsemane prayer just like Jesus did and just like Paul did. God, if you can, take this cup from me. And Paul says 3 times he begged the Lord that whatever this was would leave. But instead the Lord's response was this. Each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. Here's what Paul recognized. Notice this. So now I am glad. Paul's saying there was a point in my life when I was not glad to boast about the things that make me look weak. But now I am glad. Here's why. Because the Lord has spoken to him. My grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. And here's the reality. If our life is meant to be lived in complete, utter reliance upon God, then weakness is a gift. And if my life is meant to demonstrate to the world the power of Christ, then weakness can be a gift for that as well. And here's why. Because weakness requires us to rely on grace. Weakness requires us to rely on grace. Listen, I am wired to want to perform. This morning, I had a great week, by the way. It was awesome. I love my kids, but I got to spend 3 days away from them with my wife, and it was great. And I love my kids more when I came back after that. It was great. Michigan won in March Madness. That was great if you're a college basketball fan, but I had a great week. But it was kind of a different type of week, and I didn't have the same way of preparing to speak today. And so this morning I woke up, and for whatever reason, my insecurities welled up. And I thought, oh no, am I prepared enough to speak? Do I have it all together? And my instinct was to say, hey, Caleb, muster up your abilities, use your skill. But here's the deal. That wouldn't help me at all. What I needed to do is exactly what we sang earlier. Run to the Father. Fall in the grace. Lean upon his grace. The thing that you wish the Lord would take away because it's a weakness, if you didn't have that, imagine how little you would cry out to God for his help. I mean, think about that. Whatever this thorn in Paul's flesh was, it was so he wouldn't become proud. And what does it mean to become proud? To be self-reliant and self-promoting. And the thing that saved him from that was the reality that he had a weakness that required him to constantly run to the grace of God. We've all got that thing. And Paul says, you know what? I've realized I'm glad to tell you about my weaknesses because it's an opportunity for me to lean in the grace of God, and also weakness is a gift because it's an opportunity for Christ's power to be shown. You know, oftentimes when I'm getting ready to come up here and speak or speak somewhere else or whatever it might be in my life, I'm reminded of the fact I know the real Caleb and his own ability. I know that in high school and college, anytime I had to get up and speak for 5 minutes in front of more than 5 or 10 people, I would sweat through my shirt, not sleep the night before, and be shaking the whole time. I know that in my own ability, I can't even do this thing right here. But the boast is in Jesus. Right down here under this carpet, every one of you under the carpet, when this carpet was put in, there's a bunch of verses written, Bible verses and things written on all these on the floor. And right here underneath that is the statement from 12 verse 9. I will boast all the more gladly in the things that make me look weak, so that the power of Christ might be seen through me. I wrote that right there to remind myself, as someone wired to want to perform and present my best self, to say, no, I want you to be impressed with Jesus. And I want my life to be lived in a way that is about people being impressed with Jesus and boasting in him. So Paul wraps all this up in verse 10, and he says this: that's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses. Right, that's not a phrase most people think about in our world. I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Wait, Paul, don't you know these are a contradiction? You can't be weak and strong at the same time? Paul says, oh yes, I can. Oh yes, I can. Because Paul knows this reality, that true strength is the freedom to admit weakness. Look, if my life is about boasting in me, if my strength is found in my weaknesses not being exposed, I will lay awake at night and I will scramble throughout my life to try to make everyone think I'm amazing. An actual sturdy life, the sturdiest version of life, is the one that says, hey, guess what? I have weakness. I have weakness. To readily admit our weaknesses. That I could say, oh, yeah, that's right. I was abused when I was a child. I was molested, and then that turned into a real brokenness in me, and I wrestle with sin and addiction throughout my life. Oh, yeah, that's right. I do. I deal with insecurity. I do. I have insecurity, and I get stressed about things, and yeah, I'm selfish, and I have a temper. And sometimes I've completely lost my temper with my family and really chose the wrong thing. Yeah, that's right. Sometimes I find that I feel motivated by selfish ambition when I go to do something to minister in some way. Yeah, I readily confess that. Do you know how much freedom there is in not being afraid to be exposed in my weaknesses? And Paul knew that's true strength. That's true strength. We're going to sing a song, and I wrote down the lyrics to the first verse to make sure I get it right, but we're going to go into a song right now and just respond with our heart to the Lord. But here's what the first verse says: you love with no reservation. You're not looking for perfection, and there's no need in me pretending. I'll give you everything. As we go into this song, here's one I want to speak to our hearts. The best way for Christ to be seen through us in the world around us is to no longer pretend, to boast all the more gladly in the things that make us look weak, that Christ would be seen through us. But we will never become the kind of people who aren't pretending in the world until we aren't pretending before the Lord. So as we go into this song, here's what I want to encourage us to do. I want you to consider in your heart, what are the things that make you feel weak? And instead of kind of holding that back from the Lord in any way, as we sing this idea, I give you everything. I want you to think about not just giving him the best of you, but giving him your imperfections and your flaws and your brokenness and your weakness and your failures of the past and your weakness in the present. Just give him all you are and say, Lord, use all that I am, that you would be glorified. That you would be glorified. You stand with me as we go and sing this song.